Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Donna Chow and I'm your host and your moderator for today's eLotus webinar. eLotus is the leading provider of continuing education for acupuncturists. Today's webinar is Beyond Qi Stagnation, Chai Hu Formulas presented by Ivan Zavala. In addition to this herbal formula class, Ivan has taught courses on Meijing pulse diagnosis as well as Gui Zi Tang and related formulas. He is also scheduled to teach Futsu formulas on June 8th. The best way to access all these courses, both past and future webinars, for free is with a Gold Pass membership, which you'll also receive unlimited CEU course access and free herbs. So before we begin, let me go ahead and do a bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar is from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific time, and we will have one break. If you have not done so already, you can go ahead and download your copy of the lecture notes from the course access page from your account. And if you want to join the chat, please do this right now. Set your chat preference to everyone so that everyone can see what you're typing. And if you have any questions for Ivan during the presentation today, please type them into the question box in your Zoom control panel. If there's time during the presentation, Ivan will go ahead and answer them. The quiz and video replay will both be available tomorrow afternoon, and you will receive an email notification when they are ready. Let's go ahead now and begin today's webinar by welcoming Ivan Zavala, who is the founder of Nirvana Acupuncture. Ivan specializes in autoimmune disease and internal medicine. His interests as a Chinese medicine practitioner and professor are in treating severe and complex diseases using direct insight and guidance from Chinese medical classics. Ivan is passionate about sharing significant medical concepts that underpin various historical eras of Chinese medicine with other professionals. Okay, Ivan, you can go ahead and take over now and share your screen.
For being here, so let's begin the webinar. So today's webinar is called Chai Hu Beyond Qi Stagnation. I named it as such because often we think of Chai Hu as treating Qi Yu, right? This Qi depression, this Qi constraint. And that's a limited way to think of Chai Hu. And in fact, we can say that that idea of, because we have to understand that in the old days, there was no such thing as Qi stagnation in the way that we conceptualize it today. Chai Hu was primarily used, well, we'll investigate what it was primarily used for, but this idea of Qi constraint as being a liver issue, that comes from later historical periods, right? In particular, we can say the Qing dynasty around 1600s. So in the old days, they did have this idea of knotted qi, right? They called it qi jie, qi jie. Qi jie means knotted qi. And while it's similar to maybe qi constraint, qi depression, qi stagnation, it's a bit different. It has a certain nuance. So we'll investigate some of these nuances today, okay? So first we have to get an underlying understanding of what Chai Hu is. Often, when we try to understand in medicinal, just for those who were in my Guizhi class, we first want to understand what some of the classical sources state about the plant, and then we tease out the meaning. So one of the oldest books, of course, that we should all know, at least the name, right, and hopefully in content, is the Shenong Ben Cao Jing, the Divine Farmer's Materia Medica. And in that book, you see that the categorization of formulas, the categorization of herbs, is quite different than our Materia Medicas today. We have to understand that Materia Medicas evolved throughout time. And when I say evolve, I don't mean necessarily in a good way. I don't necessarily mean in a bad way either. They just change and transmuted based on the circumstances of those times. So the Shenong Ben Cao Jing we have to look, how does it classify herbs? Well, it classifies herbs primarily through 3 grades, right? Sanping, right? The 3 grades, superior, middle, and lower grade. And not only that, it also then categorizes the herb based on if it's a plant, an animal, or a stone, right? And so it's kind of like the 3 realm of existence, right? So it's kind of using heaven, right? Anytime you use 3, you're using the Tiandiren model, which is heaven, earth, humanity. So any medicinal that's upper will be heaven, any medicinal that will be middle grade will be humanity, and any medicinal that will be lower will be earth, right? And there's more things to say about that. And then the other aspect that, as I said, how the Shenong Bensao Jin classifies herbs is basically through flavor, okay, through flavor and temperature, right? The temperature of an herb and the flavor of an herb. And then it'll give you a list of indications. This is different, quite different than how we learn today, because first of all, when we open up a Materia Medica, we see a bunch of different flavors for an herb. And we have to understand that that is a culmination of different experiences of different doctors. It doesn't necessarily mean that herb has all those flavors all the time. So that's important to understand, because if we want to understand the Shang Lun, for example, right, the cold damage treatise, we can be using flavors from future times to try to understand, because flavors, the way is integrated with the function of the herb. It's like the intrinsic yin yang nature of the herb, right? And then its temperature as well. So chai hu flavor is bitter and balanced, right? Ku, right? Ping. That's quite different already than how we think of chai hu, actually, because most times when we think of chai hu, people think of it as pungent or acrid, right? As they being this herb that mobilizes upward. But the Shenong Bensao Jing already flips this idea for us and telling us, no, it's not acrid or pungent, it's bitter. And we have to understand what bitter does in the human body, which is quite different than the pungent flavor. So yes. So then it also says it treats the heart and abdomen, removing this binded qi, right? This concept of binded qi in the intestine and stomach, drink of food accumulations and gatherings, cold heat evil qi. And then it says this important phrase where it says it pushes out the old, like Tui Chen, Zhi Xin, right? It pushes out the old to bring out the new. And that is the fundamental function of chai hu. It pushes out the old to bring out the new. That's the image of spring, for example, right? Chai hu is the image of spring. And so already we want to understand that what they're telling us is that chai hu, what it's doing to the human body, it's almost renewing the human body by getting rid of things that don't serve you, right? In particular, things that are binded, right? They're binded in certain areas of the body, which they tell us in the heart and abdomen, and all this intestines and stomach. So already we can think of chai hu, it can treat the chest, the heart region. It can treat the whole abdomen. It can treat the intestines and stomach, so it has a gastrointestinal effect, right? And it can treat accumulations and gatherings. So that means the jiju. That means that it can treat tumors, right? Okay, it can treat any accumulation and gathering. So it's an important herb for tumors, okay? And then of course the cold heat evil qi means that it's going to be treating a complex, right? 寒热邪气 is going to treat a complex of the interfacing of yin and yang, right? When yin and yang are basically dueling it out, right? Like two boxers or something. And then again, this idea of pushing out the old to bring forth the new is the image of spring, is the image of renewal. It's the state of when you have accumulated so much that Chaihu is able to bring forth something new into your life, right? And it's doing this through its flavor of being bitter and balanced, okay? So that's what the Shenong Ben Sao Jing says. The Ming Yi Bielu, which is, because we have to understand that Shenong Ben Sao Jing is written by an author. We don't fully know who wrote it, okay? But the Ming Yi Bielu, that is written by someone we do know, right? Called, I believe, Tao Hong-jing, right? Tao Hong-jing, who kind of helped compile for us the Shenong Ben Sao Jing as we know it today, right? He was a Taoist, but he also wrote his own material, America, and that's called the Ming Yi Bielu. And he says a bit of different things in the Shenong Ben Sao Jing, but they're sort of similar, right? He said it's slightly cold, okay? So he changes a bit and saying that it's not just balanced, it's slightly cold nature. Right, slightly cold, not very cold. It eliminates cold damage, right? So it's going to be used for Shanghan. But already when Tao Hongjing, right, the author of the Mingyin Bielu, was writing this, he already had kind of read the Shanghan Lan, right? He already kind of understood how Zhang Zhongjing was using Chaihu. So that comes from almost Zhang Zhongjing uses it, treating cold damage, right? Which is different than the Shenong Ben Sao Jing, because the Shenong Ben Sao Jing says Han Re Xie Qi, it treats cold heat evil qi. But here he said, no, it's treating cold damage, Shanghan, cold damage. Vexation heat under the heart, right? All phlegm heat with binding repletion, right? So it's able to treat, that idea again of something stuck in your body. So all vexation heat and phlegm heat is a byproduct of this binded qi, okay? This binded qi leads to vexation heat and phlegm heat. And we know nowadays that popular phrase that people say when they say qi yu hua, they say qi constraint, qi depression transforms to heat, right? Things that are constrained in your body, that are stuck in your body, that are lodged in the body, are going to heat up. And when it heats up, well, when the qi depression, because qi naturally has a warming nature, it wants to move. And if it's not moving, it's going to basically lead to heat patterns. And not only that, anything around the qi, the fluids and even the blood is going to start to heat up. That's why people start to get vexation heat under the heart. That means the blood is heating up, right? The heart governs blood. So now the blood is heating up because the qi is stuck. And the phlegm heat is because the fluids are heating up because the qi is stuck. Then evil counterflow in the chest. We have to understand that you can get qi, you can get qi counterflow or evil counterflow when you have qi's depression. And why that is because the body has safety mechanisms. So if the body, kind of picture like a balloon, like a hot air balloon. If that balloon is accumulating so much hot air, it eventually wants to pop, right? It eventually wants to make a hole, right? To escape. And that's how counterflow develops from qi constraint and depression. That the counterflow is almost like the body's mechanism to try to almost rectify distorted physiology. Like, okay, I need to try to get rid of this constraint, and it does it through counterflow, which isn't necessarily the best thing, but we have to understand the body is basically reacting to the constraint. Wandering qi within the 5 zang, large intestine distension with accumulated water, and dampy hypertonicity. I'm not exactly sure what wandering chi within the five viscera mean. Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But the large intestine distension with accumulated water, that means that what chaihu formulas, such as sinisan, right, can be used for things like ascites, and I've used them for things like ascites. And there's various doctors who have used formulas like sinisan, and they combine it with something like urchintang or bancha formula to treat ascites, right? Because with ascites, we have to be careful of draining too much water, because if we think of somebody with ascites with a bunch of water in their abdomen, damp toxin, and you start draining water, well, you might actually damage their yin. So you want to actually get rid of that stagnation, get rid of the stuck fluids, but not damage yin. Well, Chaihu actually is a perfect formula for those because it's able to push out the old and bring forth the new, right? And then it's able to treat damp B hypertonicity. And remember, that's because when the chi moves, the fluids move. So sometimes when people have dampness, one of the first things we want to do is fix the chi, right? Also, when somebody has blood stasis, sometimes we fix the blood stasis, we want to fix the chi. Hence, for those that know, for example, dong acupuncture or even just regular acupuncture, right? This idea, for example, of using like large intestine 4, or in dong acupuncture, of course, we lingu da bai. And lingu da bai, of course, works on the mechanism of chi. But you understand, if you see the discussion on lingu da bai, right? The magic bone and the great white, you see the discussion that if you're able to rectify the chi movement of the body, you're able to rectify all blood movement of the body, right? So you're able to treat blood stasis by working out the chi of the body. I mean, it could be that, James, wandering chi within the five viscera could be wind. Yeah, that's a good thought. So then we have to try to understand, right? Whenever we try to understand an herb, we want to understand the herb through the spectrum of commentary on that herb, right? Because the issue with the classics is that deciphering the classics is not always the easiest thing. Therefore, we rely on what other further commentators have said about the herb to get the panoramic perspective on that herb, right? And a commentator that I first want to put into emphasis is Cheng Wuji. Cheng Wuji is interesting because he essentially is one of the first, if not the first, commentator of the Shang Lan, right? Cheng Wuji. And well, that's important to understand that Cheng Wuji comes about 1,000 years later after the Shang Lan, right? The Shang Lan was written in the, I think, in the Eastern Han Dynasty, which is around 100 to 200 AD. And Cheng Wuji comes in the Song Dynasty, which is about 1,000 years later, right? From 900 something to about 1200 AD. But he comes around the 11th, 12th century. So already we have to understand that nobody commented on the Shang Lan until 1,000 years later. And he was one of the first people to actually, he comes from a certain school of thought that he basically comments on the Shang Lan based on the Neijing. Right? He links up the idea of the Neijing with the Shang Lan, right? Not everyone's going to agree with that because some people say, no, the Shang Lan is a separate school. You cannot use the Neijing to explain it. But Cheng Wuji was like, no, right? He definitely thought there was connection. And he is one of the most influential commentators of all time. In fact, if you know about Shang Lan history, there's a famous, very famous, extremely famous Shang Lun doctor that lived in the 20th century called Li Duzhou. And Li Duzhou, right, he basically said, well, if you want to study the Shang Lun, the first thing you want to actually do is study Chengwu Qi, right? He basically says, before you read the Shang Lun by itself, you want to read Chengwu Qi, right? Luckily, there is basically a Chengwu Qi translation in English, right, by Jonathan Shells. It's kind of pricey, but it is available in English. Anyway, he states, the Chengwu Qi states the bitterness of Chaihu is used to effuse exterior heat, right? 易发表热. So what this actually, why I bring this up is because what I'm trying to emphasize is that the bitterness, right, is actually what is doing the effusion of in Chaihu, right? This fa, these things of emitting outward. Because we often think, well, that emitting outward has to be pungent, and that's why some later doctors changed the flavor of Chaihu to be pungent, because they did not understand that the bitterness is what's doing the effusion, right? Because it's a very particular type of bitterness. We have to understand that bitterness has different gradients. One gradient is a light bitterness. How do we know that Chaihu is light? Well, remember the Shenon Bensao Jing says it's ping, it's balanced, right? Being something that's balanced means that it's going to be something that's by nature not something that's going to be very thick or heavy. It's going to have more of a yang kind of quality, right? Balance is a yang quality, actually. So it's going to have a lightness to it. And from that lightness, it's then able to, right, when it's lightness, that means because it's light, it's going to be able to raise, because it's going to go up, but not because it's pungent, because of its lightness, of its temperature. Then, since it's going to go to the upper burner, then the bitterness takes effect, right? Then it's able to go up. And we know kind of does that because if you look at Chaihu, the herb is very light, right? It's almost like this twig-like thing, this brand, right? And so you know that it's not very heavy, right? The bitterness is different from like the bitterness of something like Remania, Shudi, or Shangdi, which is very thick and heavy bitterness, which is going to sink it into the lower burner, treat the kidneys. But Chaihu is not going to necessarily do that directly. It's going to use the bitterness, right, to descend that upper burner, right? And we're going to look at that more. The treatise on medicinal nature states it can treat heat taxation, bone and joint fixation pain, heart chi and shoulder back pain. So Chaihu is an important herb for all types of pain in the body. So for people that come to you with fibromyalgia, right, and not just like fibromyalgia, for example, due to damp, right? It can be used for all type of fibromyalgia as a first move, right? Check that knotted chi in these people, because if you work on people with fibro, you know they often have some type of accumulation, and not just physical accumulation, often emotional accumulation. All right, so Chaihu is able to unblock that, right? Because remember, when we think about emotions in the old days, they classified them almost as a form of direction, right? As a type of chi movement. Well, Chaihu works in chi, right? So it's able to treat all type of emotional disarrays, right? Pushing out the old, bringing out the new. It also pertains to emotional states. Diffusing and obstructing blood and chi, exhaustion and emaciation, right? That's often something that we don't think of Chaihu, right? We often think of the stagnation, but it can actually treat exhaustion and emaciation. And the mechanism of that is, as I said, it's kind of like when you get rid of old blood stasis, you're able to renew new blood. You're not able to regenerate new blood if you're not able to get rid of old blood. Same thing with chi patterns. If a person doesn't have enough chi, don't start just tonifying them, right? That will be sometimes a mistake. First, we have to get rid of the chi depression, the knotted chi in their body, and then the chi is able to regenerate by itself, and then you might be able to boost them. But you cannot, you cannot regenerate a person. It's kind of like a person, hoarder, a hoarder. You cannot just go to their house and start just bringing out beautiful things when they have a bunch of mess in their house still. You have to disperse all that, throw that in the trash, and then you go bring that spring cleaning into their house, right? So that's how we sometimes treat these people that have this exhaustion and emaciation. We think of Chai Hu formulas, okay? Governing the descent of qi and elimination of food. That's an important aspect of Chai Hu. It xia qi, it's able to descend qi. When it descends qi, that means that it's able to, well, how is it doing that? Through its bitterness. So it's getting rid of qi depressions, qi stagnation through descending qi. And in the old days, one cause of a lot of diseases was this lodged food in your body, right? Because the lodged food not only putrefies kind of to some degree, but it also creates a lot of, like, as I said, some type of toxin in the body, basically disturbing the mechanism of the movement of Shaoyang, the movement of what Chai Hu is going to target, as we're going to see. It governs temporal disease. Temporal disease is diseases that have to do with time. So so this is a concept that I don't think is presented often, that some herbs work on space and some work on time, right? It's this old concept of space and time in Chinese medicine. So a nerve that works on space, for example, will be something like dahuang, right? A rhubarb. That works on space, getting rid of something that's stuck somewhere in a spatial place, like in your intestines. What Chai Hu is able to get rid of things, it does it through modulating your body's almost biorhythm. And that's why it can treat all these diseases that have to do with this biorhythm disharmony, diseases that come and go, malaria, things like menopause, things like fibrocystic breast that come and go, things like tumors that wax and wane, symptoms like autoimmune diseases where you have flares and then you don't have flares, chemical disturbances in the brains like bipolar, mania, depression, these diseases that have shifts with seasons and days and hours, right? And then it also unresolving interior and exterior heat, right? It's able to both treat heat or febrile responses, both in the outside and inside of the body, right? Because primarily Chai Hu is an exterior herb, right? It treats basically heat in the body by treating the exterior depression, right? The exterior constraint or mechanism of qi. And once that is unblocked, the heat inside the body also clears. Now, of course, it's going to be a very specific type of heat. It's not going to be like a Yamin heat, of course, which is a very more hotter presentation, right? The heat in Chai Hu is quite different than the Yamin heat, right? The heat in Chai Hu is a manifestation of wind and qi constraint, of course, right? Versus Yamin, which is due to repletion and due to dryness type of heat, right? So yes. So another famous commentator, Yetian Shi, and Yetian Shi we should all know because when you think about Wenbing disease, Yetian Shi should come to your mind, right? Yetian Shi is this doctor who essentially, he basically created the model of Wei, Qi, Yin, Xue, right? When we diagnose Wenbing disease, right? Defensive, protective, Qi level, nutritive, and blood level. But Yetian Shi also was quite more prominent in other things than just Wenbing disease. He was quite a depth physician. And he had a commentary on the Shenong Bensao Jing. So he says, Chai Hu is neutral, endowed with the heavenly qi of central rectifier, right? So it has the administrative function of the central rectifier, because in the old days also, as you know, herbs, organs had visceral qualities or positions, right? They had positions related to the government, right? So the heart is, of course, the emperor, liver is the general, as we know, and the gallbladder is what we call the central rectifier, zhongzheng, right? Zhongzheng. And the central rectifier, well, we have to try to understand what the meaning of the central rectifier was in the old days. But if we just think of the term zhongzheng, the central rectifier, it's the thing that is basically rectifying the middle aspect of the of administrative work at the governmental level, at the center. So that's kind of like the gallbladder. Just think of the gallbladder function. It doesn't necessarily digest your food, but it releases, for example, bile, which helps the stomach, right? It, in Chinese medicine, of course, deals with ministerial fire. It's a full organ. It's related to, of course, the correlation, as we know, gallbladder is related to being an extraordinary organ connected to the bone marrow, the bone, the vessels, the uterus. It's the only organ actually connected to them. So out of that central rectification, it's able to basically administer direction and rectification of physiology in all directions, right? That's almost the gallbladder's job. Because the liver is the general and the gallbladder is the thing that almost carries out the executive orders of the liver. Its flavor is bitter without toxicity, obtaining the earthly fire flavor flaming upward. The gallbladder is the office of central rectification, the residence of ministerial fire, right? So that's where ministerial fire resides. Therefore, it alone enters the foot Xiaoyang gallbladder channel, its qi and flavor being light and ascending, yang within yin, that is Xiaoyang. Right, so here he's almost describing Chai Hu through the lens of Xiaoyang, right? So by Yetian Shi's time, Chai Hu was basically seen as working primarily through Xiaoyang. And so to understand Chai Hu, we have to try to understand Xiaoyang physiology, right? Which, if we understand Xiaoyang physiology, you have to understand that Xiaoyang physiology has to do with ministerial fire, right? That's why he says it obtains the earthy fire flavor flaming upward. That is the pathology of Xiaoyang, right? This earthly fire flavor that flames upward. That's why with Xiaoyang, you get the dizziness, you get the sore throat, the dry throat, you get the temporal headaches, you get the bitterness in the taste in the mouth, right? You get, right? Earthly fire flavor means earth will represent dampness, fire will represent obviously fire, right? So this Xiaoyang patterns are almost related to almost damp heat patterns, okay? Yeah, or fire patterns. Yeah. Therefore, it governs the not. Again, it says the same thing here. He just basically explains what this means, what right, governs the knowledge of the heart, abdomen, intestine, stomach. The heart, abdomen, intestines, and stomach are the 5 zang and 6 fu, right? So he's basically actually what's the word? Extrapolates further that what the heart, abdomen, intestines, and stomach are. He says it's actually all the 5 zang and 6 fu, right? He says it's all the 5 zang and 6 fu, not just those regions, right? So that means Chaihu can reach every place in the human body. The zang and fu collectively have 12 channels. All 11 zang rely on the gallbladder, right? So here he said Chaihu is light and clear, ascending or thrusting gallbladder qi. When gallbladder qi orderly reaches, then the zang following is the fusion and transform. Then the 11 zang follow, it's the fusion and transformation, right? So for the zang to be able to diffuse and transform, it depends on the gallbladder's ability to do its job, right? To orderly reach. When we think of, for example, the liver governs orderly reaching, that means that remember that concept of the liver governing almost the smooth flow of qi, right? That in actually pathophysiology has to do more with the gallbladder, because remember, the liver didn't really have to do with qi back in the day. It had to do with blood, right? The liver governs blood. And it's the gallbladder, the Xiaoyang aspect, that is actually dealing with the qi patterns. So whenever we actually often think of qi depression of the liver, we're actually thinking of gallbladder patterns. Because if we think of a qi depression of the liver, that is actually Jueyin, right? That is Jueyin. And the Jueyin qi depression is quite different than the qi depression of the Xiaoyang gallbladder qi depression. And that's when we have to discern Xiaoyang versus Jueyin disease, okay? Therefore, whenever the heart, abdomen, intestine, stomach have bound qi, which means all the 5 zang and 6 fu, in all cases, Chaihu can scatter it, 散之, right? So here's just commentating on all the Shenang Ben Sarjing, right? So it governs drink, food, and accumulation because food and drink enter the stomach and disperse essence into the liver. The course and dispersion of the liver also relies on the Xiaoyang gallbladder as the governor of birth and emergence. So that's the image of spring that he's going to talk about. So, so this concept of Xiaoyang, the little yang, right, this lesser yang, it's the idea of what Xiaoyang represents will be when you're in winter mode and now Xiaoyang is coming about. So that is the birth, right? That's the Shengfa, right? That is the idea of birth and emergence. So this winter correlation of winter to spring, that's Chaihu, right? Because when things are accumulated, that is winter, okay? Accumulation is winter, where things are frozen and static. So when you actually get renewed things, that is the birth of spring. That's why often Chaihu formulas can be used right after winter. Often they're a good usage to cleanse the system, like lymphatic cleanses. And there's popular lymphatic cleanses in Western natural circles, right? They use cayenne pepper and lemon or whatever people use. Well, we can use Chaihu formulas. But also this idea of from winter to spring symbolizes the idea of the winter aspects of the day into the spring aspects of the day. So what that means is from when the night ends and you start to basically get the morning, the dawn, right? The dawn, when the sun rises. If you start to get symptoms when the sun rises, that is actually a problem with Shen Fa, with birth and emergence, okay? Um, so we can use Chai Hu formulas for that. Yeah, so, and again, it can also disperse essence, right? This idea that sometimes, often Chai Hu formulas are used by certain doctors to treat things like bone marrow cancer, right? Now, can Chai Hu cure those things? I mean, I don't. That's a very different kind of question. But it can treat it. It can prolong these people's lives. And in my experience, treating a good amount of cancer now, well, people with cancer. I'm not going to say I treat necessarily that based on legalities, but a lot of this people respond really well to Chai Hu formulas, right? Especially cancers and tumors that are lodged in certain anatomical places, such as lymphatic system, right? Such as the bone marrow, right? And certain connective tissue cancers that we're going to look at a bit. So, any questions so far? Shaoyang circulates in the half exterior, half interior. When Shaoyang contracts Yibo, Yibo simultaneously in the yin causing cold. When Yibo simultaneously in the yang, it causes heat. So here he basically explained why you get the symptoms of fluctuation. When the Yibo's in the yin, then that's why you get the cold symptomatology. When the Yibo's in the yang, that's why you get the hot symptomatology. And then Chai Hu says it harmonizes that, therefore governing the Yibo chi of cold and heat. When spring first arrives, the myriad things are altogether new. Chai Hu obtaining the nature of heaven and earth spring, right? And upbearing, it enters the Shaoyang to engender chi and blood, therefore governing the pushing out the old to bring about the new, right? So he just correlates that function with spring. With prolonged taking, the clear chi circulates upward, the yang chi strengthens daily, therefore lightening the body. So he basically said, well, taking Chai Hu over time can lighten your body, right? Can actually strengthen your yang qi. Why? Because yang qi now can flow. The quintessence of 5 zang and 6 fu are supplied above, therefore lightening the eyes. Right? For Chai Hu is an important herb for ophthalmological conditions, right? The liver governs the eye, wood governs the eyes. Just think about where gallbladder 1 starts. When clear circulates upward, the yin qi descends, therefore boosting the essence. The essence is the quintessence of yin qi. So here he actually tells us when this yang qi is able to circulate, right? And how can yang qi, when yang qi circulates upward, he means, and the way you're able to do that is when there's no stagnation, then the natural course of yang qi is to go upward. And when yang qi is able to go upward, when the wei qi is able to move upward, then the yin can descend, right? Anything that's stuck in your body, right, was yin. So when the qi is able to move upward, then all those accumulations are able to go downward. And that's why Chai Hu can, for example, treat gallbladder stones, right? Chai Hu formula. That's why it can treat, for example, constipation, right? Those are yin accumulations. And the way it does that is by making the yang qi circulate upward first, and then it can descend those things. Now we're going to also read commentaries by extremely famous Dr. Nihai Shah. Nihai Shah states that Chai Hu is also known as Si Hu, not only enters the liver gallbladder, but enters the half exterior, half interior space. So we have to conceptualize Chai Hu as entering this space, right? And once we try to understand what this means, this half exterior, half interior space, it basically extends our understanding of Chai Hu and the functions of Chai Hu. And we're going to keep trying to push this understanding of what half exterior, half interior space means in the human body, right? So one of them is a proponent of the lymphatic system related to Shaoyang. So whenever somebody has lymphatic system disease, we can think of it as related to the half exterior, half interior space. Now, does that mean anytime someone has a lymphatic system disorder that we use Chai Hu? Of course not. Of course not. I don't want you to think that. That will be a mistake. And, and, and you still have to diagnose the patient. However, if you see this idea of not a chi and a person has lymphatic system disease, then Chai Hu likely is going to be a good choice as a first move, for example. This idea is important when dealing with tumors, for example, he states. He borrowed this idea of lymphatics from another doctor, Xiaoying Fu, who in the Shanhalan Fawei states that Han Xiaoyang triple burner is precisely the original name of the lymphatic ureter, something like that, and states that Taiyang cold water belongs to the triple burner. From the waist above, there is lymphatic tubules. From the waist below, through the bladder, there's the lymphatic system. Now, you have to understand, back in the day with Xiaoyang Fu, well, Western physiology was just entering kind of the mainstream, right? Xiaoyang Fu was like in the 1900s. Of course, we've learned a lot more about Western anatomy, but what's important to understand is that he is correlating basically the triple burner with the lymphatic aspect, and that not only that, he also states that within the triple burner, Taiyang cool water flows. So basically, the triple burner, remember, governs the waterways. So it's almost like he's almost viewing the waterways within the triple burner as related to almost the lymphatic system, right? And when you're able to treat that, you're able to treat both stagnation in Taiyang, right? Stagnation in the bladder, stagnation in the lymphatic system, right? So Chai Hu, for example, can treat bladder issues too, because if you think of somebody with bladder issues, such as prostate issues, prostate cancers, you know, prostate swellings, anything with the tubes of the body, that is basically half exterior, half interior space, right? So we can use Chai Hu formulas to treat that stuck cold water in those spaces, right? And that's almost the idea of dredging, of coursing the lymphatic flow through Chai Hu formulas, right? That's related to Xiaoyang. Nihai Sha emphasizes the use of Chai Hu with certain diseases, right? Such as heat evils, intermittent diseases, alternating cold and heat, bitter taste, ear deafness, head dizziness, headache, right? Things that we often think of Chai Hu for. The heat can be seen in symptoms such as steaming bone heat, right? Which of course is this idea of almost this heat that's coming from your bones, meaning this heat that basically has entered into your essence level, into your Jing level. So Chai Hu can actually treat very deeply, right? Can treat bone heat, which a modern doctor by the name of Li Zhongyu emphasizes Chai Hu formulas in the treatment of malignant tumors in the membranous tissue, right? Lung, liver, and kidney, specifically targeting the complications of pleural, pericardial, and mediastinal effusions, ascites, cerebral edema, and in particular, Xiaoyang heat patterns, lymphoma, myeloma, myoma, and lymphatic metastasis. So for example, lung cancers, we can use that. I've actually used some Chai Hu formulas for that, because remember, with lung cancers, you start to basically accumulate water around the lungs, and that roundness around the lung, the pleural spaces, right, those connective tissues around the lungs, we can relate it to that Xiaoyang, the half exterior, half interior space. This is just basically Nihai Sha's like dosage range. I don't follow this, so I just put it as a reference. He says for plump people, right? He uses 5 to 6 chen. Each chen is 3 grams, so that'll be 15 to 18 grams, right? For regular people, use 3 qian, 9 grams. For small child, use 1.5 to 2 qian, so that'll be 4.5 to 6 grams. Something to consider. I don't really use this actually. I might just use the small child consideration, but yes, I don't really use this, to be honest. I have to break. Oh yeah, so let's just get through this Tang Wang Chuan, and then we'll take, no, actually let's take our break now, and then we'll come back, okay? 10-minute break, okay?